Hey everybody, it is Thursday, July 24th. You're listening and potentially watching the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, it is great to have you here in studio.
Thank you. If you are watching this on YouTube, you'll notice no headphones. That's because Moshe and I are in the same place.
Properly lit.
Properly lit. No audio issues.
Your in-laws' luggage isn't behind us, behind you in the shot.
That's right. It is a real studio, real microphones, real lighting. Things were going great here in New York City until I found a live bug in my salad at lunch. That was the only hiccup so far.
Yeah, they're going to hear from us. This salad place in Midtown Manhattan. Jill, for those who weren't there, and 99.9% of you weren't there, but I was there, Jill froze. Like she's literally munching on a salad trying to talk to me, and then she sees this bug, and you jump.
Well, I spit out my food.
Yeah.
Your face looked like, what is happening? Do I need to jump in? Does she need the Heimlich maneuver?
Choking?
What is going on?
Yeah.
And then Molly, who works on operations, mom mode took over for her, and she grabs the salad. She's like, you're okay, it's fine. But I have lived to tell. I joked that I was looking for something a little crunchy in my salad, and I found it.
Listen, sometimes they throw in some protein for you here in some New York City places. But anyway, you're alive and in one person, and you survived. I hope this doesn't dissuade you from coming back into the city, Jill.
Definitely not. I lived here for many years. I said, as long as it wasn't a cockroach, I think I'm okay. But it is actually so great to be here in person, to be with you and the rest of the team. So I will definitely be doing it more often.
It's been a very busy podcast studio today. We, just before taping this, taped an interview with Pete Buttigieg. So we'll have a bit of that in today's podcast. And if you're a premium listener, head over to the premium podcast feed. We have the full interview available for you first right now. We'll get to much more about that in a second.
Okay, now to the headlines, starting with that interview with former Transportation Secretary and potential 2028 presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg. He sat down for that in-depth interview with Mo News and a lot of headlines, including what he says about whether the United States is ready for an LGBTQ president.
Yeah, his time with Joe Biden, what he says about all the questions that have emerged about that. Also, Jill, his concern about the state of U.S. democracy, why it's pretty stark, and also what he has to say about AI and his concerns about that.
To the Idaho college murders, a judge sentenced Bryan Kohberger to 4 life sentences. What happened in the courtroom as victims' families finally got to speak directly to their loved one's killer.
And the 3 words he uttered, just 3.
Overseas, anti-corruption protests in Ukraine taking aim at President Vladimir Zelensky, the bigger implications as Ukraine looks to fight back against Russia. To the economy, the state of the real estate market will have the latest home sale numbers as prices once again hit a record high.
Plus, Jill's personal experience, she just bought a house.
It's rough out there, Moshe. Uber taking more steps to keep passengers safe. We'll tell you what they're doing. And 45-year-old Venus Williams becoming the oldest woman since Martina Navratilova to win a singles match. What she said in her post-game interview. And Moshe has on this day in history.
Jill, we got a wide range for you today. The modern rediscovery of Machu Picchu, plus NSYNC. Big day for NSYNC.
Bye, bye, bye. Is that NSYNC or Backstreet Boys?
Well, you get partial credit. That is NSYNC, but that's not what we're talking about today.
All right, Moshe, let's start with your sit-down with former Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, a potential 2028 Democratic presidential candidate. He joined us in our New York City offices Wednesday morning with a little scruff on his face as he is no longer a cabinet secretary.
Yes, it was a great conversation. He was very candid and scruff on his face. Yes, he was doing a podcast tour. He had just come from doing Breakfast Club. He was doing NPR After Us. He stopped at Mo News in between. He's been on a very aggressive podcast tour and talked about how, his main thing right now, he's shopping around a book proposal. And he's basically been spending time with his 4-year-old twins, taking them to school. And so we talked a bit about fatherhood in the podcast, but also a lot of politics. And again, one of the things that he's always prided himself on is he goes out and does Fox News. And he's really been trying to lead here when it comes to Democrats doing new media outlets like ours.
I was going to say, I love that he's doing a podcast tour because it proves that politicians are waking up to the fact that you've got to meet people where they are. You've got to meet the audience.
Yeah, that's been the big thing. And we talked about this in the podcast. You guys should definitely listen to it about how Republicans have gotten an advantage in podcasting and how Democrats are trying to catch up. And a lot of credit for Trump's victory partially goes to his podcasting strategy in 2024.
All right, now to some of the big headlines from the interview. Buttigieg says he is concerned about the state of the U.S. democracy. He warns that American democracy is, quote, north of a 5 on a 10-point worry scale if 10 were to equal authoritarianism.
Both parties should examine the chances of their survival.
Jill, for reference, those of you in the Mo News Premium community will know we have our democracy scale. We sort of set it up because a lot of you like to ask me, like, Moshe, how worried should we be?
Right.
And so I've been living on this sort of informal scale. I was like, I'm at like a 3.5 on the democracy scale, to which I told Buttigieg, I'm at 3.5. He's like, no, man, I'm north of 5. I was like, so technically that means we're closer to Russia or China than we are to Norway, perhaps. But that part, I think, was one of the more interesting parts of our conversation.
Right. So he pointed to existing issues in U.S. democracy pre-Trump, like the lack of recent amendments to the Constitution, also the Electoral College, which allows presidents to potentially win the presidency even if they don't win the most actual votes. Republican George W. Bush won in 2000, even though Vice President Al Gore won the popular vote. Same for Donald Trump in 2016 against Hillary Clinton.
Yes, he also talked about the fact that it's impossible to change the Constitution, even though that was one of the goals of Thomas Jefferson and the founders, is that basically they envisioned throwing out the Constitution every 20 years as things evolved, as technology evolved. Well, that has certainly not been the case. And in fact, in the last 50 years, we've done like one amendment because of how difficult it is. Considering
how hard it is to get a budget bill past Congress, I have very little hopes for any new amendments to the Constitution.
Yeah, we basically made it impossible. And, ultimately, we're still mainly going off of a bunch of amendments that came between the late 1700s and, the early 20th century. And then since then, we've sort of been frozen, even though Buttigieg acknowledges that our systems are just not functional for our modern needs. One of the reasons why so many of you and so many voters have lost trust in the system. So on top of that, he then went into, some of what we've been seeing unfold here when it comes to Trump, his attacks on the courts, the media, law firms, universities, increasing executive power, a very compliant Congress. And so just a lot there. He also talked and really got candid about the Democratic Party, its struggles when it comes to messaging. I pushed him on everyone views you guys as the elitists. Ultimately, you guys still have higher unfavorables than Republicans. Like, what is going on with your party? And he was very honest about the fact that he feels that Democrats have been policing speech, have been very tisk at people. Democrats are unwilling to, challenge some of their own ideas. And so we talked a bit about also how this has given rise to Zoran Mamdani and democratic socialism and why young people especially are very disenchanted with Democrats. So that part of the interview I thought was interesting as well.
Buttigieg politically aligns with more of the centrist camp of his party, but as he does consider a potential 2028 presidential run, he's going to need to contend with the GOP, which tends to have a more unified message. Republicans are firmly behind Trump. He's polling above 80% approval among Republicans. And Buttigieg not mincing words about his party's current standing. He gives Democrats an incomplete grade ahead of the midterms.
Yeah, not a lot of confidence here because I was like, all right, what's your plan? How confident are you about re-election here? What happens if Democrats, what's the scenario for winning the White House again in 4 years? And he goes, when or if we win the White House ever again. And I was like, what do you mean if? And he's like, we can't be assured of anything these days. Here's a bit of what he had to say about that.
We're past the point of just believing that there's some pendulum that comes back and forth or some cycle that one party's up or one party's down. We're way through the looking glass right now.
Jill, as we've covered here on the podcast, Republicans in Texas in particular are trying to redistrict and bring in 5 new seats potentially in Texas, which would help them maintain a House majority in next year's midterms. But he was very, very, again, stark when it came to the state of American democracy. I framed it as like we're turning 250 years old next year. What are your reasons for optimism and pessimism? And he was increasingly, as he watches what's going on, expressing concern here. And again, concern for his own party, its messaging, and the need to get their own house in order.
We also asked him about his time in the Biden administration. Again, he was the transportation secretary. He noted some mistakes for the Biden administration on a whole. He said not cracking down on immigration at the U.S.-Mexico border, also keeping schools closed for too long during COVID, now that we know how harmful it was to students. And it was a departure from what then Democratic candidate Kamala Harris said when she was asked if she would have done anything differently from Biden. She famously told the ladies on The View, not a thing.
Yeah, very clear that he would have done things differently. I said, how would you answer that question today? Obviously, he has the good fortune of being able to answer it later and after her here. I also asked him about, the allegations of Biden's cognitive decline, especially as we've learned all these new things in the various books. Buttigieg still being very diplomatic here. I was like, all right, the Biden we saw in the debate, did you see him behind the scenes? He's like, no, I never saw that. So that's what he said there, but that's certainly something that Democrats will have to answer for in the coming years. He did also defend his work as the Secretary of Transportation. Several of you wanted me to ask him about the air traffic control shortages, why he didn't do more regarding Newark Airport, some of the things that we've seen arise this year. And he had a lot of pushback there saying that some of the things, the money that's now been allocated, that's stuff he was asking for years and Congress didn't give him.
And the big question, will he run for president in 2028? He says, I'm not even thinking about that yet. But betting markets would say otherwise. They're already placing him among the top Democratic contenders behind Gavin Newsom and AOC.
Jill, his media tour would say otherwise. Some of his travel plans would say otherwise.
Yes.
If you're like running for that office, remember he ran in 2020 and won Iowa. And then, of course, people sort of circled around Biden in that election. But certainly, if you look at the betting markets, if you look at the polls, he's up there, especially if Kamala Harris chooses not to run. I sort of bet that she won't again. And so he's a leading contender here. But what was interesting was he wouldn't announce, obviously, on our podcast that he's running for president again. But I did say, how do you think about it?
There's two things you do. One is you look at the office and what it requires. What does this office in this moment need? So like when I first ran for mayor, it's like, oh, okay, we've had the longest serving mayor in history. He's stepping down. The city feels like it's lost its way to a lot of people. There's a lot of unfair kind of criticism of our city. The office needs these things, which at the time meant, I thought, new generation of leadership, somebody more focused on business development and economic growth and a whole bunch of other things. And then you look at yourself. You say, what do I bring to the table? And you see if there's a match. Are there things that I bring to the table that's not like the others, that uniquely respond to what this office needs in this moment?
All right. Again, our full conversation right now with Pete Buttigieg is over on the Mo News Premium podcast. If you want to listen to it immediately, go join Premium. It's just one of the many reasons the Premium podcast, exclusive and early listens on the podcast, along with all of the other content we offer you there and analysis. You can join today, mo.news/premium.
All right, now to a major murder case that we've been watching closely. A judge on Wednesday sentenced Bryan Kohberger, who recently changed his plea to guilty for the killing of 4 Idaho college students back in 2022. He was sentenced to 4 life sentences with no chance of parole. Kohberger declined a chance to address the court, including the victims' families, which means that even now, one of the questions that is still unanswered is why Kohberger committed those murders. Why those 4 students specifically, Ethan Chapin, Kaylee Gonsalves, Madison Mogen, and Zana Kernudel, given that there were other roommates in their house at the time that Kohberger saw and did not kill. When the judge asked him if he would like to make a statement, his only response, quote, "I respectfully decline," to which a family member of a victim responded from the audience, "Coward." As expected, it was an emotional day in court. The sentencing came after friends and relatives of the victims described their loss and anger over the killings. So let's take a listen to the big sister of one of the victims, Kaylee Gonsalves, tearing into Kohberger.
Don't ever try to convince yourself you mattered just because someone finally said your name out loud. I see through you. You want the truth? Here's the one you'll hate the most. If you hadn't attacked them in their sleep, in the middle of the night, like a pedophile, Kaylee would have kicked your f***ing ass. Thank you.
Yeah, so that was Olivia Gonsalves there. The judge also not mincing any words. He described Kohberger to his face as a coward who had slithered into the home in Idaho. If you remember, he was set to stand trial next month, but his change of plea allowed him to avoid a trial and also avoid the death penalty here, and that was key. Some background, he was a PhD student at nearby Washington State University and studied criminology, of all things. Again, some of the victims' families here were hoping for some more guidance as to why he did what he did, Jill. But I want to read a message, actually, I got from a member of the Mo News community. And this woman lost 3 family members in a quadruple murder several years ago. And this is what she wrote us. I can understand the frustration of these family members and not knowing why, but they also need to understand most of us never get the why, let alone a confession from the killer. She talks about how her family had to go through a trial and then the attempts to overturn the conviction, and that it was quite a process. Going to the point where this guy was on death row and he was trying to get clemency from the state. And so this woman says they'll know where this guy is for the rest of his natural life. And again, the confession is key. Jill, I can't imagine going through that scenario. And so it was remarkable to get that message.
Luckily, there are not many of us who have been in that situation. But that is incredible insight, especially given the frustration from some of these family members who really wanted to see him perhaps get the death penalty, or at least wanted more say in how this case played out. Time now for the speed read, starting with a slew of headlines related to the Jeffrey Epstein case. From the New York Times, a federal judge in Florida on Wednesday denied a request by the Trump administration to release grand jury transcripts from an investigation into disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein, which is pretty much what we had expected. The quick denial came in response to a request by the government last week asking the court to unseal the documents and then transfer the case to New York, where Epstein was indicted after a grand jury investigation in 2019. In its request, the Justice Department cited extensive public interest and transparency to the American public. For weeks, the Trump administration has been trying to quell right-wing supporters who are demanding the release of more material related to Epstein, a convicted sex offender who hanged himself in a Manhattan jail in 2019. Also related to Epstein, the House Oversight Chairman James Comer has issued a subpoena to Ghislaine Maxwell for a deposition. He says it will happen on August 11th at a federal correctional facility. Maxwell was an associate of Epstein's. She was convicted in 2021 for her role in helping him recruit, groom, and abuse underage girls, and she is currently serving a 20-year prison sentence. And then there is this from the Wall Street Journal reporting that the Justice Department told President Trump in May that his name is among many in the Epstein files. The White House saying, quote, "This is another fake news story, just like the previous story by the Wall Street Journal." Now, according to their reporting, they say senior administration officials told them that when the Justice Department officials reviewed what Attorney General Pam Bondi had called a truckload of documents related to Epstein earlier this year, they discovered that Donald Trump's name appeared multiple times, and that in May, Bondi and her deputy informed the president that his name was in the files. They reportedly told the president that the files contained what officials felt was unverified hearsay about many people, including Trump, who had socialized with Epstein in the past. One of the officials familiar with the documents said they contain hundreds of other names, and they note being mentioned in the records, not a sign of wrongdoing. The Wall Street Journal also reporting that officials told Trump that senior Justice Department officials did not plan to release any more documents related to the investigation of the convicted sex offender, because the material contained child pornography and victims' personal information. And they report Trump said at the meeting that he would defer to the Justice Department's decision to not release any further files.
So, Jill, there's a lot to break down here in these various threads that developed late Wednesday afternoon. First things first, this Wall Street Journal story, the latest Wall Street Journal story, now the bane of Trump's existence. He's suing for $20 billion over that first story that came out last week with the letter. So this new one doesn't tell us that much more than we already knew, right? We already knew that Trump took Epstein's plane a number of times. He's been in the plane logs. The plane logs have been released for years. We know that the two of them were social. We knew the two of them were friendly. There have been photos out, videos out. Epstein was at least at one of Trump's 3 weddings. We don't know if he was also at the final one, but we do know that he was at the one with Marla Maples. And so there's a lot of video and photos of these two. There's a deposition Epstein gave back in 2010 where he talks about his relationship with Donald Trump. We know that they were friendly, right? In that journal story last week, Trump allegedly submitted for Epstein's 50th birthday. He wrote that letter. So none of that is a shocker here. So the fact that Trump may be in the Epstein files, well, of course, if it entails everything of Epstein's life, well, Donald Trump was a part of that life. Again, Epstein talked about Trump in a legal deposition. So the question is, we don't know the nature of those mentions, right? When Pam Bondi says to Trump in the Oval Office based on this story, hey, sir, you're mentioned in the files, we don't know if there's mentions in there that we don't already know about, or if it's all stuff that we already know about, right? That you were on the plane, that you guys were friends. They had some sort of falling out around 2004, allegedly about real estate matters, where Trump banned Epstein from Mar-a-Lago. But they had a relationship for a while. So the fact that, again, he's mentioned here, not that significant unless we find out more details here. These Wall Street Journal stories so far, by the way, sort of like so far in terms of the letter last week and then this one in terms of what could be, right? Some huge revelation. And the big thing to keep in mind about the Justice Department that we also learned about in the story is that they make the recommendation for a variety of reasons, including that they can't just put a whole bunch of hearsay out there not to release these documents. And so you find out in the story that Trump is like, oh, is that what you're going to do? I agree with that assessment. That's how the Journal lays out the conversation. The Department of Justice is not TMZ. They can't just put a whole bunch of stuff out there, right? The Justice Department is federal law enforcement. They conduct investigations. They do indictments. They can't just say, hey, we're going to dump tens of thousands of files that may or may not mention a whole bunch of people, some of it unsubstantiated, and some of it could just literally just be, witnesses being like, I think I saw this person at the party. Was that person there? I don't know. It kind of looked like that person. Well, being mentioned at an Epstein party, right, could ruin your life today. So the Justice Department is not in the business of just dumping all those documents out there that could really ruin. People could lose jobs, lose families, a whole variety of things over an allegation that in 1999, someone thinks they saw someone somewhere, right? So they had to make a call here on what they were going to release and what they weren't going to release. And they just decided we're not releasing anything, which takes us to the court case you mentioned today. They were very strategic last week when Trump said, hey, DOJ, go try to release the grand jury testimony. They knew going into this that judge had no shot at saying yes. Now, they are going to consider other matters here. There is a potential chance that something could get released, but on precedent, on principle, grand jury testimony is not released to the public. Again, indictments are released, but all the grand jury testimony they hear, well, some of that doesn't end up in the indictment because, again, some of it might not be reliable or prosecutable. And so the judge saying, no, I'm rejecting your request. You guys didn't make a good enough case. Not surprised about that. It also lets the White House say, hey, look, the judge won't let us release the Epstein stuff. It's not up to us. So there's that. Then as far as the Maxwell testimony, we talked about it on the podcast yesterday. Ultimately, I don't know how much is going to come of that. We will be watching on August 11th for headlines coming out of that. That won't be on camera. I cannot imagine that being on camera. That'll be a behind the scenes thing, but I imagine the members of Congress might talk about it afterwards or might leak something about it afterwards. But the big thing about Ghislaine Maxwell, keep in mind as to why she was prosecuted and sentenced to 20 years in prison, is because the prosecutors couldn't go after Epstein anymore. He was dead, right? Allegedly committing suicide there in the prison. So they went after his helper, the person who funneled women to him. Now, how could she have gotten out of it? Well, potentially by giving up bigger fish, right? As a prosecutor, you always want to go after a big name. And if she had a big name for them, she probably would have dropped it so she didn't have to live the rest of her life in prison. So that's why color me skeptical on what we might hear from Maxwell, because she had her shot. She got sentenced for 20 years. So what makes us think that she had something huge to reveal? She chose not to reveal it, got sentenced to prison for 20 years. But now, on the off chance we now care about the story again, now she's going to drop something big on us? I don't know. But we will see. Keep in mind, Trump has not been very critical of Ghislaine Maxwell. There are photos of him with Ghislaine Maxwell. We talked about their friendship, him, Melania, Ghislaine, Jeffrey. And so we'll watch those headlines on August 11th.
Now let's head overseas from the Washington Post. Ukrainian and Russian delegations meeting for a new round of ceasefire talks in Turkey. At the same time, some trouble at home for Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. He is facing major protests after signing a controversial bill this week that will bring 2 anti-corruption bureaus under the direct control of the Prosecutor General's office. Both bodies were set up in the aftermath of Ukraine's pro-Western revolution in 2014. The goal was to root out systemic corruption and help Kyiv reform its democratic system, enough so that the country could eventually join the EU. Thousands of people gathered this week in central Kyiv, close to the seat of Zelensky's government, shouting shame. Moshe, this is turning into the largest political controversy for Zelensky since Russia invaded the country 3 years ago.
Yeah, this has always been a big issue for Ukraine. It's hindered their ability to join NATO and the EU for years. When you look at corruption across democracies in Europe, Ukraine has often been ranked the most corrupt country. This is going into the war. And now with all of the billions of dollars in aid that have come through, questions as to where some of that aid has gone. We've seen resignations and firings in the defense ministry. And this has been a big issue that folks in the U.S. have brought up, as we've given them more than $200 billion in military and economic aid throughout this war. And so now you have the Europeans chiming in here saying that funding is conditional on progress on transparency, judicial reform, and a democratic government. And Jill, that comes on top of concerns that we've seen when it comes to the fact that he's canceled the elections the past couple of years. Now, they do have martial law. A third to nearly a quarter of the country's population is either living under Russian occupation or is living as refugees in areas where they can't track them down inside the country or outside the country at this time. That said, all of this combined here is giving some of the Ukraine's closest allies some pause here. We're going to watch to see how these protests continue and also whether Zelensky decides, for the sake of his country and some of these controversies, it might be time for him to go. At the same time, he's sort of the most influential guy in the country. He's tried to make himself out to be this Winston Churchill-like leader for Ukraine. So we'll see sort of what happens next.
As I think back to the start of that war, if you remember, there were a lot of offers from the United States and other allies to take Zelensky out of the country, because the thinking originally when that war started 3 years ago was that Russia was basically going to take over the country in less than a week.
Yeah.
All right, to the economy from the Wall Street Journal. Home prices rose to a new high in June while the crucial spring sales season fizzled. Signs that a housing market recovery is unlikely in 2025. Home buyers were hesitant to jump into the market in the spring, which is usually the busiest time of year for home purchases. Sales in June fell to a 10-month low. Record high prices for homes, along with mortgage rates above 6.5%, have made home purchases unaffordable for many people. The National Association of Realtors said the median existing home price in June rose to $435,000, which is a record in data going back to 1999. It is a 2% increase from a year earlier. And Moshe, as I learned the hard way in New York, being a home buyer, not all housing markets are created equal, because I kept reading about, Florida and Texas and home markets that were kind of chilling and turning into maybe buyers markets.
Yeah.
Not so much in New York, which I think is what a lot of people are realizing, that the real estate market is local.
Totally local, because you do have prices falling in Texas and Florida. So maybe, Jill, it's time to make the move
there.
Move down south. But the supply nationally overall is still below pre-pandemic levels, which means less homes available. That's pushing prices up. The chief economist over the National Association of Realtors says the fact that we hit record prices is reflecting multiple years of undersupply here. This has been a huge issue for a number of years. That said, Zillow reports that more than 1 in 4 listings got a price cut in June. That's the highest proportion for a June going back nearly a decade now. Typical home sold in June was on the market for 27 days, up from 22 days a year earlier. So it is taking longer, hence why they got price cuts. So we'll see what happened in July. We'll see how, Jill, your home purchase in July impacts these numbers when we report them next month. And I should note, as we talk about home prices here, there are some trends people are seeing, including that folks are looking for smaller homes now. They're sort of curtailing their ambitions given the prices, also teaming up with friends or family members to try to take over someone's mortgage.
I thought that was really fascinating, given that high mortgage prices are one of the things that is preventing people from selling their houses where they may have a low mortgage rate and also getting into the market. From CNBC, Uber announcing a new feature Wednesday that pairs women drivers and riders, the latest move to address safety on the ride-hailing platform. The new tool lets women passengers match with women drivers when booking or pre-booking rides. It also creates a preference in their app settings. Women drivers can also choose women passengers. Uber says this is about giving women more choice, more control, and more comfort when they ride and drive. The company says the rider's preference isn't guaranteed, but the feature increases the chances that women will be paired in the app. Uber is going to be piloting the program in LA, San Francisco, and Detroit starting next month. They've already tested it in countries like France, Germany, and Argentina.
Yeah, apparently this is available in dozens of countries. They did roll it out back in Saudi Arabia when they finally allowed women to drive there. So it is a big thing, especially in some of those religious Islamic countries. But Jill, I just came back from Japan, where this is not Uber related, but on the subway there, especially given they have some groping issues there on the subway, during rush hour in Tokyo, very busy subway system, they have women only and children only cars, which I thought was very nice. Something New York City subway should do, along with other mass transportation out there.
The problem is, in New York City, no one follows the rules.
Right. And in Japan, they only
They're
follow
rule
the rules.
followers.
Like they're genuinely confused when you like cut someone in line.
Yes.
They're just like, I don't understand. Like, what is this that's happening around me? And so Uber is doing this, especially after years of concerns about sexual harassment and some other incidents. So, you know, a nice feature here. Apparently, Lyft launched an option almost 2 years ago now that paired women, drivers, and riders. So Uber getting to the mix here.
And finally, some sports news. Venus Williams won her first singles match Tuesday in nearly 2 years, making her the second oldest woman to win a tour-level singles match in the sport's history, behind only Martina Navratilova in 2004. She won a singles match when she was 47. Venus is 45 years old. She also revealed that she is engaged to a Danish-Italian actor who had never seen her play. And she also joked that part of her comeback was motivated by wanting health insurance again.
I had to come back for the insurance because they informed me earlier this year I'm on Cobra. So I was like, I got to get my benefits on. Started training.
So, Jill, I don't know if Venus is like a prime example of somebody who struggles to pay for health insurance, but, you know, in this country, I guess you can never be too sure.
But relatable nonetheless.
Exactly.
I was like, I feel you.
So this was her first singles match in more than a year now, her first win in 2 years. She defeated a 23-year-old named Peyton Stearns in straight sets. Her next match is today in the round of 16.
I will be watching.
I know you will. All right, we end here with On This Day in History. We begin in 1911. On this day, an American archaeologist, Hiram Bingham, gets his first look at the ruins of Machu Picchu. So as an ancient Inca settlement, it's life-changing for people who go there. I know my wife has been there. Have you been to Machu Picchu?
I have not, but my husband has.
So your husband has. My wife, we should go on a trip.
We should
take
Let's
a Mo News trip to Machu Picchu. Though Alex said it was so amazing, she would go back with me. She wants me to see it. For those of you unfamiliar, this is tucked into a rocky countryside in Peru. It's believed to have been a summer retreat for Inca leaders hundreds of years ago. Virtually wiped out, the Incas were by Spanish invaders several hundred years ago when the Spanish got there. And then for hundreds of years, its existence was a secret only known to some peasants. That all changes on this day in 1911. Fast forward, on this day in 1974, the Supreme Court rules that Nixon must provide transcripts of the Watergate tapes to a special prosecutor. Sort of the beginning of the end here to Nixon. He would only be in office for just over another week or two, 16 days actually to be specific. They ruled that he could not cite executive privilege as a reason for refusing to release tape recordings. Which will actually be very interesting. I've looked at various interpretations. The most recent Supreme Court ruling regarding official acts and whether that would have saved Nixon. Some say no, these tapes were not official. Nonetheless, Jill, presidents used to tape everything in the Oval Office for their memoirs. LBJ did, Nixon did. They don't do that anymore. On this day in 2005, American cyclist Lance Armstrong became the first rider to win the Tour de France 7 times. However, just a few years later, those of you familiar with the scandal, he was stripped of all of his titles after an investigation revealed that he was doping.
I remember it so well, and it was shocking because he was one of these athletes that everybody knew. Everyone looked up to him. They had those yellow Live Strong
bracelets. Yeah. It was quite a downfall for Lance Armstrong when that got revealed. Jill, we end here, as always, with movie and music history. On this day in 1998, Saving Private Ryan, starring Tom Hanks, was released. It would earn 5 Academy Awards, including Best Director for Steven Spielberg. Jill, if you look at Tom Hanks in the 90s and like his incredible run, and we're talking about like Philadelphia and Forrest Gump and like even Toy Story, like one of the more remarkable decades for any actor in modern history.
One of my favorite podcasts is from the Ringer podcast network. It's called Rewatchables, where they rewatch some classic movies and really talk about actors and exactly that, like their run and their stretch, and if this was their apex. And And Tom Hanks is definitely up there. He has very few misses in his career.
Yeah, no, and especially in that era, That Thing You Do, Sleepless in Seattle, Apollo 13, they're just, I mean, I'm naming movies that probably so many of us of a certain generation will have seen. But by the way, going back to the Pete Buttigieg thing, we're actually only a few months apart in 82, so we made several references to being elder millennials in that podcast if you're looking for another excuse to listen.
Which also means he would be a big fan of our podcast. So
a big fan
Pete,
of our
if you're
podcast,
listening.
especially on this day in history. Speaking of which, Pete, you and I were both in college when this album came out. NSYNC released their third and final studio album, Celebrity, on this day in 2001. Included Dirty Pop, Gone, and Girlfriend. And then Justin Timberlake would go out on his own.
All right, everyone, that is a wrap. Thank you for listening to the Mo News Podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
Jill, good to have you here. Good to have you here on the YouTubes for those of you watching. If you're looking for another excuse, we had an in-studio thing today. So come check out. If you've listened and you can't get enough of the podcast, you're like, I got to watch it. It was so good. All right. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
Thanks for listening to the Mo News Podcast. Have a fantastic day. I hope you enjoyed.